How do you take the most critically acclaimed video game of all time and bring it to the modern era while trying to be completely faithful to that original product? Here's a hint. You really can't do it successfully. When you have a big IP like Ocarina of Time, you are always going to have people on two different camps of this. There's going to be the older fans who want this to be purist. I want this just to be an upscaled version of the game I played 30 years ago. For the newer people, for the younger folks, a lot of them are like, yeah, let's change it up. Let's try something new. Let's do that. Nintendo would absolutely destroy this remake if it's trying to find the best of both worlds. If you're trying to be relatively faithful to the original while trying to implement some new things to kind of shake it up for fans who want something new, trying to find the middle ground between the two is going to create a product that's not successful. I don't think that we necessarily need Ocarina of Time as a faithful remake again. There are so many places that you can play the original format for Ocarina of Time. You can play it originally on an N64 cartridge with an N64. You can play it through the GameCube re-release with Master Quest. You can play it on Wii Virtual Console. You can play it via emulation software. You can play it via the 3DS remaster, where it cleaned up a lot of the stuff and added a lot of quality of life stuff. And you can also play the N64 version of the game on Nintendo Switch Online, which gets upscaled to, I think, 1080p. There are so many ways to play the original. And if you really do want the original experience, just go back and play the original game. The game still does well today. There are some aspects of it that are a little dated, but for the most part, the game plays almost the same way that it would have 30 years ago. I think that for this game to be a success in this gaming world that we live in now, I think the game needs to be a lot more ambitious, akin to the way the new Resident Evil games have been, the Resident Evil remakes, as well as the beginning section, not all of Final Fantasy VII Remake, just the beginning section of the first Final Fantasy VII Remake game, because that rendition of the bombing mission is incredibly well done, where it's new things, it's things you haven't seen or done before, it's fleshing out characters, it's fleshing out worlds, but it's not taking away from the initial story or the original intent behind what's going on. Before we start going into all the things that I would love for them to add and change and do differently for this remake, there are so many things that they cannot touch or it will kill this game. The very first thing that's really, really important is they cannot touch the story. The story, ironic as it is really timeless. Like the story of a young boy who's thrusted into this destiny where he has to travel across time and fight themes of growing up, change, and all of these other things. It's still relevant today and it would still do well. I don't think that the story needs to change at all. I think if Nintendo were to go and start messing around with the story, this game was dead before it even got a chance to start. So keep the story the same. But in the same vein, I think a lot of the important cultural aspects of this game need to stay the same, because it's important to how the game feels, right? It's important to its identity. Think about things like Darunia dancing in his chambers while Link was playing Saria's song, or King Zora spending legitimately 30 seconds to waddle from one side of the screen to the other, right? At the time they're annoying, and even when you replay them they're kind of annoying, but they're things that you come to expect and love from this game, and I think that shouldn't be taken away here. I think that should be the exact same way that you would experience it, just brought to the new world with upgraded res and all the fun stuff. I don't think they need to change the boss fights. I think changing boss fights in this game is a bad idea, because Nintendo and the Zelda team at the time did a really solid job of building each boss around its dungeon item fairly well. I think the only one in my head that I'm like really about when it comes to using your items to deal with it is Bongo Bongo, mostly because it's really more of a bow and arrow thing than it is, hover boots and Lens of Truth. But other than that, I think most of the bosses would still stand the test of time today. And if you were to put up the Ocarina of Time bosses versus bosses from the rest of the series, I think you'd still argue that a lot of these bosses are still the best part of this game. Now, this may hurt some people's feelings, but I don't think this game needs to go fully Breath of the Wild style. I think that having an open-ended game doesn't work for this kind of game, right? The reason why Ocarina of Time is so good is because it's a tight-knit, well-woven experience. The game was developed with the player doing these sorts of things in mind. So we can build the story, we can build the puzzles, and we can build the items around the player. When you switch to an open-ended game, it really does break your narrative experience because you can't base the game off of that, right? I can't build a narrative thinking that the player is going to do this, because the player may say, oh, instead of going to Death Mountain like he's supposed to after meeting Zelda, now he's just going to go see the Gerudo, or now he's just going to go see the Zora, right? It ruins the narrative experience. Within that, I don't think that the Zelda mechanics in Breath of the Wild should be in this game inherently. I know for a fact climbing should not be in here. Link should not be able to just climb anything. I know that I don't want a paraglider. I know that I don't want shrines to replace heart pieces. I think heart pieces need to stay back. Sprinting, I am half and half on, because on one hand, I think sprinting would be really nice if you expand the world out, which I'll talk about later, to make it easier for the player to explore. And I'm okay with the sprinting mechanic if we add an upgradable stamina wheel. But there should not be a system where I can either choose to have 20 hearts or a full stamina wheel. I think that's dumb. I don't think they should do that again. I think here, if you're gonna add sprinting into this game, give us an opportunity to upgrade the sprinting very easily. Give us the stamina vessels, and then do not tie it to health. Make them two separate things that you do separately. But other than that, there are quite a few things that I think that the Zelda team should expand on or change to make this game much better for the modern audience. All right, the first thing, and it's very obvious, my biggest thing is I want them to expand on this world, right? I want them to expand on the things that we already have. I'm not saying just make it big to make it big, but I'm saying things like Hyrule Field, maybe adding flower fields throughout the area, adding NPCs that are traveling merchants, you know, maybe small little settlements, not full towns, but maybe like a house or two of somebody who lives out in Hyrule Field, or tents, or, you know, stuff like that. Have some of the Gerudo staged in camps around Gerudo Valley. That way, when Link is an adult, you know, he can fight with these guys while they're there, right? Things like that to kind of expand Hyrule Field. I think that Castletown, and so many illustrations and drawings, you can see that there's like certain streets of Castletown that don't even get touched or looked at, that are in concept art. And so I think it'd be awesome to kind of expand Castletown out. I think that any of the forced perspective spots in this game need to go. So like Castletown, it wouldn't be forced perspective. The camera would be behind you and you'd be able to freely explore the full city. I think Kakariko could do better to get rid of the stone walls around the entire, you know, around the entire village. Find a way to make it look a little more natural, like this is a village that would make sense to be in this location. And then I would love to see what they do with Lake Hylia. I think outside of the water temple and the stuff you do for fishing, other than that, Lake Hylia is kind of like a worser version of the existing Hyrule Field, where it's just like, it's a location for you to get to these things, not necessarily a location for you to explore. Like, you're not here to explore specifically that. So maybe adding a boat and you can fish in Lake Hylia, maybe dressing up Lake Hylia, giving us more puzzles, extra things there. I think that would be a really interesting and easy way to make Lake Hylia a more important place in this remake. I think they need to add voice acting. I think everybody agrees that voice acting is probably going to be in it, especially with how they presented it in the reveal trailer for Ocarina of Time Remake. I think that the voice acting should be closer to what voice acting is like in Xenoblade. Now, before everybody freaks out and is like, oh, I hate Xenoblade voice acting. What I mean by that is how it works in Xenoblade is important cutscenes and moments are all fully voiced that you can interact with. But smaller NPCs or smaller things that don't really require you to have a full voice line for, those things are just text boxes. So you have a little bit of both. You have a little bit of reading to do, but the more important things that you want to experience, those things are voiced. You know, meeting with Zelda is voiced. The first meeting with Sheik is voiced. Speaking with all of the sages in the Chamber of Sages after each dungeon in Adult Link, those are all voiced. See, things like that, those need to be voiced. But everything else, you know, like if for a small side quest, I don't need that voice. That can be a text box. So that way, you know, you get a little bit of both. While we're also talking about some NPCs talking, I would love more side quests. I would love more reasons to explore and help out the people of Hyrule. And do it in all the major cities, right? You can unlock doing side quests in Gerudo Valley after earning the respect of the Gerudo ladies. You know, you can do side quests that differ from Child Link to Adult Link in, you know, Goron City or Zoro's Domain. You know, flesh out those things. The biggest thing, and I hope they add this, I'm not sure. There's a huge chance they don't, but I would love for them to add fashion into Ocarina of Time, right? They've already done it before in previous games. I would love for you to build on the fashion thing in this game. Give us the opportunity outside of the original 3 tunics. Now we got maybe a couple more. Not even, you don't have to go crazy with it like Breath of the Wild, but you can give us just a little bit more and have those things give us like extra buffs or debuffs. For example, you know, Link's Kokiri tunic, that's going to be the best overall thing. It's going to be the best overall damage mitigation, blah blah blah. But then you get to the Goron tunic, and the Goron tunic, it looks like tougher. It's maybe implementing more metal or whatever, and it's heat resistant like it normally is. Or like the Zora skins where it looks a lot more like fish skin, or it's like, you kind of like where, okay, now it looks like you're a fish who's going to be able to swim in the water. But maybe you add a new thing, right? You know, you bring maybe the Sheikah, you bring the Sheikah armor into this game, and now Link walks slower, and that may be helpful for him as he's trying to explore the Shadow Temple or trying to sneak around in Gerudo Valley, right? You give him the opportunity that's gonna make that. You give him the Sheikah armor that's gonna allow him to sneak through there, or maybe you give him, you know, maybe this armor does more damage but takes more damage as well. Right? I would love an opportunity to kind of flesh out what's already existing in Ocarina of Time, but we still have the original 3 tunics, so the people who are a little more on the side of purist still have something to work with, and so they can still play the game in their traditional sense. Within new content, I would love maybe a little more side dungeony things, more puzzles, more reasons to explore. I would love to expand grottos. Maybe grottos aren't like a hole that you drop into. Maybe now it's a cave that you crawl down into. But then that also implements climbing again. But you know what I mean? Like, find ways to make them seem more naturally occurring instead of just like a warp zone down into a middle of a hole. Speaking of warp zones, I think that this game is probably not going to have any load zones for any of the main spots, and I would love to keep it that way. I would love for all of the dungeons to probably have warp zones, but I would like for them to be... I would like for the outside of the dungeon to still look big to represent the size of what you're going into. For example, if we're talking about Lord Jabu Jabu is one of my biggest ones, right? The inside of him is huge that you do for the dungeon. But when you walk around him outside, you're like, that's not big at all. I would love for Jabu Jabu to be significantly bigger, to fill out that space, to make it feel like it's a giant fish that you are actually walking in while you're doing the dungeon. Or like the Forest Temple, where the outside of the Forest Temple looks great, but it's smaller on the outside than it is on the inside. I would love for that to just be expanded out just a little bit more so it looks big, but then you can do a load zone in there to kind of fluff it out. That way you're not trying to build the whole dungeon while it's also connected to the overworld. The last thing I would love for them to add is, and I know that they talk about all the time with the cut content, that they take the cut content and they use it in other games. But I think that if we're going to talk about adding a new dungeon back, I think that the Light Temple is the only one that I would actually be excited about having, right? If it's at a really good spot, and it allows for a connection moment between Link and what's going on with the adult timeline stuff and talking to Rauru. You know, instead of Link just immediately waking up in the Chamber of Sages, you know, Link wakes up in the foyer of the Light Temple, and now we have Rauru saying through Link, "Hey, come find me. I'm in the Chamber of Sages further into the Light Temple." So that way you can explore, and then you don't have to make it a huge dungeon. It's not a big one, but it makes it feel like the light medallion is earned. It gives you a second to adjust and give puzzles to the player that's specifically designed around the fact that he no longer has his child items and he only has the items that are shared between the two. Within that, you can also build this to add maybe a one new item, maybe an item that we haven't had in this game before. You know, I don't know what you would do that would kind of lean into that, but I think that it would be a really interesting thing to introduce that. And you know, and like I said, you don't make it super duper long, but then once you get to the end of the Light Temple, now you get to talk to Rauru, and now he explains to you what happened, right? Because now there's tension, there's stakes to how come I have become an adult and I don't have answers yet, and so then Link finally gets his answers further in. I think that would be a really cool way to do that. And you know, I'm okay with trying new things. I'm all cool with trying new things with this game, mostly because I've played the original thousands of times. I've played it in vanilla, I've played it in randomizers. You know, I've just explored it all. So I hope that Nintendo gives us a reason to return to this game that we all know and love. That's beyond just nostalgia. You know, I hope that they really do lean into this to make this really, to take what was already the best Zelda game, what is arguably the best game of all time, and to bring it to the modern era and continue to show everyone how it can still be the best game of all time, despite the fact that it's been 30 years and it's still different, right? But what do you guys think? Do you think that Ocarina of Time is going to fail if it stays to be more faithful, or do you think that Ocarina of Time should and is going to do well as a more reimagined take on the traditional story that we all know and love? Let me know down in the comments. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the next one.